Thank you, Mr. Dobbin. I apologise for my momentary hesitation. I thought we adjourned until the 4:30 start time, but I am delighted to have a chance to serve under your chairmanship and to see so many colleagues from the Fylde coast here, particularly the Fellow Minister, who has had a chance to move back one row from the previous debate, and my other colleagues. It's welcome to see so many of us here today. I know the member for the Fylde who would have been here, were it not for personal circumstances, would also wish to have his support for the points I intend to make today placed on the record as well. At a time when we are seeing very rapid changes in welfare provision, it can often be forgotten that we need to have a large, active, professional, highly qualified staff to deliver those changes. The staff of the Department for Work and Pensions on the Fylde at the numerous sites across the Fylde coast perform with great professionalism. They deliver a consistently high level of service against quite a challenging backdrop. It's a doubly uncertain backdrop because we know the rigours that the department are working under. A core budget reduced by 26% by 2014-15, corporate overheads to be reduced by 40% by the same date, and it's clear that that means for some very difficult and tough decision making by ministers and those who have to manage the service. And as a written answer given to my honourable friend and member for Wyre and Preston North back in June 2011 demonstrated, the headcount on the Fylde at the three main sites has declined from 5,116 in 2002 to 4,600 in 2011. And of course that raises many questions in the minds of those who work for the DWP on the Fylde as to what the future might hold. It is unsurprising, indeed natural, that they would wish to see more job opportunities come to the Fylde. I don't think that will surprise the Minister to hear that, and it is of course quite natural to want to see more work come to the Fylde. But I perhaps might, in defence of the Minister, observe that the last time I asked specifically how many compulsory redundancies we had seen on the Fylde, the answer was 3. I recognise there have been a number of managed programmes for people to leave the service, and that's why the headcount has reduced. But I recognise that we have been fortunate on some levels that the cuts have not been worse than they might have been on the Fylde coast, and I think it's important to place that on the record. But we have to recognise that there will be ongoing challenges. We cannot assume that because we have escaped lightly so far, that we will continue to escape lightly in the future. We are facing shortly the closure, for example, of the Martin Mere site, which is going to see 300 jobs have to be moved elsewhere. Now, the purpose of my debate today is not to rehearse statistics over job losses, nor even just to demand extra work come to the Fylde, but to look specifically at how decisions are being taken, at which sites are to remain open, which sites are to close, and most importantly, how we decide where to move those staff to of the three main sites. And I may end up being rather arcane, and those who don't live on the Fylde might think, what is he talking about? But although these three sites might only be 7 or 8 miles apart, it is actually quite a significant logistical challenge to get from Norcross to Peel Park. Not something I think many would voluntarily choose to do who live on the Fylde. Yet, the way in which we are taking these decisions is making many people take very difficult decisions about whether they can continue working at the DWP given other caring responsibilities that they may have with their own families. Back in 2006, my honourable friend, the member for Wyre and Preston North, was successful in getting a German debate on an identical issue, which was looking at how decisions were being made about the Fylde, and he was very successful in that he got the then Minister, the honourable member for Stirling, to pay a visit to the Fylde coast and to look at what was occurring there. And we were fortunate in that she agreed to appoint what was called a cluster lead for the Fylde, and they would have an overall perspective of what was occurring on the Fylde coast. And each of the main sites beneath that would also have a site lead who would feed into that pyramid process, if you like. And I think the key thing I wish to communicate to the Minister today is that I think that was a model which I think added value to the decision making. And I would also take the opportunity to remind the Minister continually that we are looking at the future of these sites, and future can be a difficult concept in government. We don't know what next week brings, let alone what happens in 2018, but many, certainly at Warbrick House, see the 2018 date, when the transfer from DLA to PIP is due to be completed, as something of a crunch point for the future of the DWP on the Fylde. And any comments that the Minister can make about the future of Warbrick House in particular, I think will be gratefully received as well. Since 2006, we have, as with any organisation, seen natural wastage. We've seen people retire who were these cluster leads or move to other jobs, and that architecture has broken down. That decision-making process that made for better decisions has broken down. And if I can take one admittedly convoluted example, I think it might demonstrate. The decision was taken to wind down the most northerly site, that of Norcross, in September 2012. The last date of occupation was due to be the 31st of August 2013. However, on the 18th of December 2012, it was announced that around 220 staff would remain on the Norbrick site at Tomlinson House. The remaining staff would still transfer to both Warbrick and to Peel Park. Peel Park being the most southerly of the locations, and Warbrick squarely in the middle. All of this caused a number of problems for all of our constituents in terms of how they were to cope with these changes. We were grateful that the jobs were maintained upon the Fylde, but the consequences of that were actually quite difficult. Now, more recently, the DWP announced that the landlord at Martin Mere wanted DWP to leave the site. This meant 265 people had to be rehoused, but there was great confusion. Martin Mere is nearest, I suppose it's fair to say, to Peel Park, and at the southern end of the Fylde, but there was uncertainty over whether they would be moved to Warbrick or to Peel Park. It oscillated between the two. No one could quite decide. In the end, they opted for a move switching from Peel Park to Warbrick, specifically because Peel Park had to accommodate those who were moving from Norcross. So the most northerly had to go to the most southerly, when a cluster lead might have said, well, hang on a minute, can't we put the people who are nearest to Norcross into the spaces at Warbrick and then accommodate the people from Martin Mere at Peel Park? Now, that may not have been possible, but at least a cluster lead and a system of site leads might have allowed that debate to have occurred. Of course, I'll happily give way.
To the honourable member and my constituency neighbour for giving way. And I just wanted to reinforce the point he made and to say, does he agree with me that the complexities and the difficulties in this area are exacerbated by the fact that public transport access to Peel Park still remains problematical?
I thank you for that intervention, and he is entirely right. One of the ongoing battles that we have had has been to maintain public transport links to ensure that staff can get to these new locations, and I was grateful to the predecessor, the Honourable Member for Epsom and Ewell, who was quite vociferous that no change could occur at Norcross without sufficient public transport links, and maintaining that, I agree, is a vital battle that we have to hold. But because we haven't had cluster leads, the local branch of the PCS have informed me that there have been some 35 local piecemeal meetings with differing business units here, there and everywhere, discussing all these different manoeuvres, when a more streamlined system might have not just brought out a better decision, but a smoother decision as well, that was less disruptive for those in the system itself.
May I, honourable member, give it?
I will happily give way.
Thank you, Mr. Going. And in intervening, can I just congratulate my honourable member for securing this debate, particularly on Lancashire Day. Just to agree with him again in terms of the context, and to underline that MPs across parties have a very good relationship with the PCS union there, and we've always had a practical and constructive relationship. But the problem of these suggestions of moves, and to underline that these are not the most highly paid jobs in the DWP, and these suggestions of people moving around and trying to face the transport connections on extremely low salaries is perhaps a major factor in causing a great deal of unease, particularly in people employed from Fleetwood in these particular sites.
Maynard.
I agree entirely with that point. In fact, if I was being minded to be cheeky today, which I rarely am, I would suggest that many of those who are making the higher level HR decisions find it very easy to get to these locations on the Fylde because they come straight down the M55 from outside of the Fylde. Yeah. You have incredible access then. It is those who live on the Fylde and have to move around it that actually struggle the most. So can I urge the Minister to look again at reappointing a cluster lead to ensure that any future changes are managed with a strategic perspective in order to avoid these piecemeal, uncoordinated and occasionally contradictory decisions that are being taken as to where people are located on the Fylde. I don't mean it to be critical at all, but just to observe that the best use of the DWP estate has to be one which is looking across the Fylde as a whole from a Fylde perspective and not just looking at a map and the distances on a map between one location and another. At the same time, I think the Cluster League can also more effectively lead the debate about how we best use the Fylde resources going forward post-2018. As I was saying, there remains great concern over what happens in 2018 to the staff. And can I also ask the Minister to look at whether the Service Personnel and Veterans Agency, agency of the MOD, which is also on the Norcross site, can be brought into this cluster discussion? Because it seems to me eminently sensible that if we are discussing the fate of civil servants on the Fylde, the MOD and the DWP are the two main departments that are employing people, and Norcross is a site that encompasses both departments, and they have to surely be part of that discussion. And I have recently just had rumours, and no more than rumours, that they are relocating 50 people to the SPVA from Liverpool to replace 50 casual staff who have been taken on in the Blackpool area. Clearly there are still discussions going on about what the SPVA does. I know it is not the Minister's remit at all, but once again it demonstrates that there are decisions still ongoing which have very real consequences that aren't being coherent in my view. And I think we can all recognise that the DWP has immense financial challenges to face, and as my honourable friend mentioned, there is a very strong cross-party, non-partisan relationship with the PCS on the Fylde coast, which we always seek to do our best on behalf of those that we represent. That's because they are doing a superb job, often on very low wages, often in very difficult circumstances. It is not always the most heartwarming of HR departments, I think, at Warbeck House, to put it mildly. And I have heard some quite appalling horror stories at times. But I want the civil service on the Fylde to have a strong and vibrant future. And I think a key part of achieving that would be to have a strategic cluster lead that would enable the Minister to ensure that when decisions are being taken, he can have the confidence that it is taking into account the reality of what is occurring on the Fylde and not just what a civil servant in Sheffield has spotted on Google Maps that morning. So I thank you very much for your time today.